All right, cool. Mr. Murphy, kick it off with you for intros.
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Murphy. I'm just on the precipice of becoming a civilian as of August 1st. Former submariner turned joint strategic planner, turned already into independent consulting on behalf of a DARPA project, but looking to get into the big leagues of consulting is my primary target transition-wise. But glad to be here this afternoon.
Awesome. Brent.
Brent Emery. I actually got out about 7 months ago, just completed my MBA 2 weeks ago at UCLA Anderson. Hot on the job hunt, but consulting would definitely be something. And actually, Stephen, I think we've actually spoke about 8 months ago when you were over at BCG. So thanks for doing this again.
Awesome.
Yeah, of course.
Brody?
Yeah, Brody Burkout, submariner, just like Matt, retired after 29 years, retired last June, relocated to the Los Angeles area. On the job hunt, it has been very frustrating over the last 12 months, especially with the current events and things that have happened here in the LA area. So looking at plan B, which is potentially starting up my own company, looking at consulting work in data analytics.
Brody, if you had to kind of identify what the most frustrating thing has been, what is do you think the biggest lever that we can think about?
The hardest part for me, now I retired after 29 years, so I'm a little bit, I've retired as a captain and commanded 3 submarines. The hardest part is that for the level that I should be transferring over into those companies, they're really looking for somebody that has industry experience and are very reluctant to gamble on an unknown skill set outside of their industry. That's been the most frustrating part for me.
Do you think it's been the translation of the background in a compelling way in the time that you have with the people that you're in front of?
I'm not sure it's being lost in translation. I've had a lot of discussions as far as how actually my skill set would transfer over very easily, but they're just like, yeah, we want somebody that has connections in the startup tech world, or we want somebody that has media experience or entertainment experience. You name the type of company, and they want somebody that either already has a Rolodex or kind of already speaks the language. That's kind of the impression I've gotten.
Okay. Cool. No, I appreciate the feedback or the context. Kim?
Kim Bellis. I'm currently an explosive ordnance disposal officer in San Diego, looking to transition out in February of 2021 and looking at consulting. So I've been doing a lot of case prep and informational interviews as they look forward.
Great. Pat?
Hey, I'm Pat Hart, located in Boston. Still active duty, but will retire later this year. Background's Navy F-18 guy. I am currently doing the DoD Skillbridge Fellowship with a small tech company, kind of part leadership consulting, part customer success.
Great. Rob?
Hey, good morning. Rob Latu. I'm a Navy EOD guy, forward deployed out here in Singapore right now. So that's my biggest challenge is connecting with people in the U.S. Across up to 12 time zones. Getting out in December, so right now working on the networking job hunt. Same thing as Kim, targeting the big consulting companies. So trying to figure out what case interviews are and how to pass them.
Okay. Jack?
Hi, I'm Jack James. I'm also a Navy EOD officer stationed in New Jersey. I'm getting out in about February or March of next year and very interested in consulting.
Great. Arthur?
Hi, good day, everyone. I'm Arthur Vares. I transitioned out from Army Special Forces in February 2017, actually, so 3 years ago. My top preference at the time of my transition would have been consulting, but it didn't seem to materialize as I wished. So I did a couple of other things in the meantime. Currently working at Amazon in Dallas, Texas as an operations manager, and still, I guess, passively looking at opportunities in consulting. So the reason for being here is to kind of get a feel for what everybody else is looking at, what are the right things to do to kind of work my way in that direction.
Awesome. Alex?
Yeah, hi everyone. Alex Four. I actually am within the deal strategy practice at Strategy End with Steve. So joining to potentially offer, a voice for someone who has recently transitioned, recently finished up my MBA at Booth, and understand a lot of the struggles that you guys are talking about, because I've lived through them within the last 6 to 18 months. So happy to help where I can.
Awesome. Steve?
Yeah, and Alex is a former naval officer and former naval aviator. You were 60s, right?
Yeah, I was a 60 guy, 60 Sierras.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, so I'm Steve Wan. I'm a partner at PwC in the deal strategy group. Prior to that, I spent 9 years at BCG. I've been working with Jordan and the Elite Meet team since, I believe, the second event. So it's been a little over 3 years now, going on 4 years now.
Yep.
And always happy to help and to provide some perspective. What I thought we would do today.
Stephen, actually, do you mind if we pause? I met Steve Jordan because he did his intro. I apologize for that.
Sure. Yeah, no worries.
Hey guys, dialing in from work. So Steve Jordan, Navy SEAL in San Diego, transitioning out in January of 2021, ideally. Looking into tech consulting mostly right now, specifically DevOps, if I can get into it, but I know it's a reach and have to advertise my skills in the right way. So looking forward to hearing what we got to talk about today. Thanks.
Awesome. And maybe just kind of help set a little bit of context here. One of the reasons why I do all these intros is not so everyone remembers everyone's background, but it's more so we can practice like saying who you are and what you do. Just it's all about getting the reps in the gym because it's so tough. And it's also good to kind of do it in this kind of safe environment here. And also so everyone knows like what the other situations that you're in, because you're in the same situations. It's a good way to connect here. But for a little background on Stephen, and we've known each other for 3 years now. Was at I think Elite Meet 2 in New York, and presented there, and is our resident used car salesman turned partner at BCG turned partner at PwC. So has an amazing background, and I really appreciate your consistency with the Elite Meet crowd and just always being willing to help out, whether it's attending events, whether it's helping to get people in, either in interviews, helping out kind of smooth things out and get just kind of the consistency with the brand in front of Elite Meet and BCG and now hopefully PwC. But I thought it'd be good to kind of, maybe to turn this over to you and kind of hear your perspective about like your path. What do you do now? And then maybe kind of talking some cases so people might have some upcoming interviews. But, I'd love to turn over to you, just kind of hear your path back into where you're at.
Sure, absolutely. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1999. I got out as an E4 in 2003. So I did one enlistment, many years ago. But you know what to say: once a Marine, always Marine. I went and did a couple of other things. I ran a car dealership for a while. I actually ended up pursuing a career as a scientist. I was a university professor briefly. Decided I didn't like where that was going. Career-wise, I didn't think there was a lot of runway. And so ended up at BCG. And when I was at BCG, I happened to sort of purely through luck connect with a guy who was at the time a young partner, and I was a brand new, BCG consultant, who had an ambition to build a veterans network. And he felt like the veteran community was a talent pool that had been historically under-leveraged, that there were good people out there who didn't have the same sort of standard kind of educational background that we could use, that we could bring into the firm, and that we would go find them and we would support their careers and try and figure out what are the areas where veterans have challenges as they come in and transition to the consulting career. And we do outreach and these kinds of things. And so I spent 5 years at the head of the Veterans Network. just recently got the opportunity to move over to PwC. And so I've been a PwC partner since February. So that's been weird. I spent 1 week in the office and then we all went home, and now we sit in our basements and do Zoom calls. So that's a little bit different. At PwC, I'm in a group called Deal Strategy, and Deal Strategy is a practice that's really focused on a set of strategic questions, primarily sort of driven by transactions, but not limited to transactions. And the reason I made the move is because I was really, when I joined BCG, I was excited about doing strategy work, about answering tough questions and exploring, different kinds of ways to view business problems. BCG over time has shifted away from that as their core business, which is okay. It's not a bad thing at all. The reality is that making a living doing strategy work is tough. They tend to be smaller projects. They tend to be, lower dollar, and they tend to be non-recurring, right? You get asked a question and you go answer it, and then that's kind of it until the next time there's a question. BCG has moved more and more over time into implementation work, and implementation is interesting and challenging work. It's a little bit different. It's not what I personally want to do. But it does have the advantage from a business perspective of being the kind of work that, takes a year or 2 or 3, and you can pretty easily point to, hey, we've been doing this for 6 months. We've, worked on 25% of your supply chain organization, and we can point to, whatever, $30 million of savings we drove. So the fact that we're charging you $10 million is, you're still saving money. At PwC, we're structured a little bit differently. And so Alex and I are in a group that focuses on doing the strategy work ahead of a transaction. And then, PwC does that kind of work too. Obviously, it's tremendously value creating, and it's tremendously sought after. But PwC kind of recognizes that, like, not everyone wants to do that, and so it's a little bit more. It's a much bigger organization, and so they're able to subdivide it into different teams that do different things. And so I'll pause there for a minute. I'll let Alex talk a little bit about his path into PwC as well, and the choices that he made after he left the Navy.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I thought that was a really good overview of how deal strategy sits inside PwC, because that's a big part of your choice when you're thinking about consulting. A lot of you mentioned that was the path that you want to pursue, and there's going to be some very specific conversations with a certain partner or a certain practice that sits within a larger organization, and it's important to understand what those sinews look like between the thing that you're talking about and the rest of the organization, because ultimately you're going to end up joining the organization, not just the team. So when I decided to get out, it was to follow a path that I had seen a lot of others pursue, that I thought sounded interesting, sounded challenging. A lot of alphas on this call right now that want to do something big and exciting, right? So, part of getting out was going to business school and seeing what else was out there. Business school is a great spot to do that because it allows you to play around for a little bit. And what you quickly realize as a veteran is a lot of people that are there have a very specific plan. Not everybody, but most people have had this exposure because they've had bosses that have gone through, a business school environment, and it's just seen as a stepping stone. Whereas veterans are there to basically find themselves. So, you got to go in with eyes wide open, but be prepared to ask a lot of questions and get up to speed quickly. Thankfully, most business schools have a really phenomenal veterans network, and that helps you get up to speed a little quicker than you otherwise might, which is how I landed on consulting. I figured out that was something that sounded like I could delay a few choices, right? Because consulting, you can play around a little bit and figure out what it is that you like to learn about while still working inside of a strategic framework, like Steve mentioned. So I spent a couple of years doing that. Got done with Chicago booth in 2019. And when you're going through the recruiting process, you're talking to all these firms, and it gets somewhat overwhelming to figure out what the differences are between all of them. So it becomes incumbent on you to take a step back and think about values, right? And what matters to you, and then using that as your framework for evaluation. And when I did that, I recognized that there were a couple things that were important to me. One, I got out because I had kids and I wanted to spend more time with them, and I was done deploying, and I didn't really want that experience the way that you typically would in traditional consulting. So the deal strategy practice actually does the majority of their work from the office. It's like 90% we spend time as a team in our home office, and that was exciting for me. So that's just one anecdotal piece of evidence there about how to line up what matters to you with what you're choosing to do next. But what you also get out of that, aside from just no travel, is you also get a pretty cohesive culture, because everybody is sitting in the office together, and you still get an office experience with very smart people who are working on very tough problems. And you get to walk over to Steve's office and ask him how he might think about solving this problem, as opposed to just being a smaller team that's on site and you don't get as much exposure. So I would encourage everybody to think about that in terms of what it is that you're looking for and why, and make sure that it lines up with what you're about to do. It's been a great experience so far. I'm about a year in. Certainly some unexpected things along the way, but I think that's one of the things that you all should showcase as you're talking about jobs is your flexibility. Because at the end of the day, they want to know two things. Are you going to be there to support the business when it decides that they're going to go in a different direction, and you're going to, play as a team member? And can you execute, right? You have to be able to prove that you know how to get things done. The subject matter expertise will come later. There's a shocking amount of people in this world, on the civilian side, that just don't know how to execute. So if you can differentiate yourself in that way, I think it goes a long way.
Would you guys mind giving a perspective about the hiring market right now for people who are entering, like maybe Kim or Brent, that years of experience versus someone who might have 20 plus years of experience, and kind of differ, maybe starting with, like Kim and Brent, for example. Like if they want to get in right now in PwC, what type of role should they be considering? Is it like a associate role? I don't know in consulting what is. I know in banking, if you're post MBA, it's an associate at an investment bank. What is that role at PwC, and what is the hiring market like? And is there a veteran program, or how do veterans fit into a PwC?
So the answer is it depends. And let me actually start out by backing up and talking about the recruiting process sort of normally. All of the firms do the majority of their recruiting through the academic sort of path, right? And so just like I'm sure you all knew officers in the service who had come from some sort of non-traditional, they were 27 and had a corporate job and just decided they hated it and went to OCS or whatever. But like the bulk of the officers you see either came through the academy, or they came through an ROTC program and then they went to OCS, and there's sort of a standard path. The same is true for most of the entries into consulting. The standard path is either you recruit out of undergrad or you recruit out of an MBA program. And so when I was at BCG, one of the things that we had in the Veterans Network pushed hard for was to say, hey, look, if you're recruiting JOs who have 8-10 years service, they're 30 years old, you can't say that they are equivalent in experience to a 22-year-old fresh graduate. We need to put them in at the same level as somebody who has an MBA. And so they would come in, one of the things we changed at BCG is they would come in at the associate level. Although in consulting, the titles usually go the other way around. Associate is actually the lowest level typically. It's the post-undergrad level. At PwC, we call that role senior associate. And the interesting thing about PwC is that it's both a big machine and it's got a bunch of different smaller teams within it. Deal strategy is a small enough team that I think if we were to find the right person, we could probably make an argument that they should be at this level or that level based on their experience without having to necessarily follow, a set of bureaucratic rules. At the same time, we are part of the big machine of PwC, and PwC has frozen all hiring through non-campus channels. Like we've just for the sort of duration of the current emergency. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think if you're a JO with sort of 10-ish years, 8, 10, 12 years, when a pilot generally sort of gets out for the first time, or you're kind of looking at a set of choices, and Alex made the choice, obviously, and would love to hear more about why you went that direction. One of the choices is to go back to school. And so that's one of the things we do see a lot of folks do is you take your post 9/11 GI Bill and you use it to go get an MBA or whatever else. The other option is to try and get, recruit directly. And I'm just telling you sort of, I think the reality at most firms that don't sort of specialize in veteran recruiting, and there are some, but not any consulting firms, right? Is that makes you sort of a non-traditional, non-standard hire, which isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. And it doesn't mean that it's not doable, but it puts you in a different kind of a path. Alex, I don't know if you have anything to add or if you want to talk about why you made the choice to do the MBA after your service.
Well, the short answer was it was a safe choice, right? There was people in front of me that had demonstrated what the results could look like if you did this, right? I had seen how they successfully made it through their MBA and what it looked like on the other side. So, that has rarely steered me wrong in my career, either as a JO or now on the outside following somebody's path of success. But one, I think, unique piece that I can introduce into the conversation is that I did it as a part-time student at Booth. So I actually went through the process of getting myself into business school and then finding a job as I exited the Navy all at the same time. So I spent, the 12 months leading up to getting out on February 2nd, 2017, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do and, who can help me do it and how I'm going to get there. Experience the same frustrations. Veterans were there to help me out on the outside. And that's how I got the job that I ended up having for 2.5 years while I went through Booth, which I had no argument to say that I was an expert in the renewable energy field, right? But I ended up working for a major developer in the renewable energy space because there were some people that saw what value a JO could bring on some of those points I made earlier. And then I picked things up along the way, right? And I might have had to work a little harder than some of the, early kids in their early 20s that had the same rank as me, but it also meant that I ended up progressing a little faster than they did over 2.5 years because people want to get you there. They have to be willing to take a gamble on you. And there's a whole set of conversations that go around that on how you get in. But then there's a whole second set of conversations about how you be successful once you get in. Because once you're in, people really do want to put you on a fast path to success. I've rarely seen a circumstance where you just get pigeonholed and you're not given opportunities to show that you are more mature, you do have some life experience, you do have some actual operational experience that you can bring to the job, but you do have to be willing to take the chance at taking a brief step back to then be in the position to demonstrate all that stuff.
Guys, if we could maybe a little more pointed with the question here around, like, if you're a junior and you don't have an MBA, should you not look at consulting right now at the big firms? Is there a better use of time in terms of, let's say you have 3 months to find a job, you have 6 months to find a job?
Yeah, I would say yes. If you're looking for a binary answer, I would say that it would be better to link up with some of the organizations out there that are meant to provide a similar experience networking wise, like Breakline, and I'm not endorsing anybody, there's some that I've heard of. There are organizations out there that put you through a brief period of ramp up and teach you some of the things that I would assume Elite Meet talks about all the time, which is, you know, how to introduce yourself, how to tell your story, how to deal with some of the typical interview questions, how to, you know, demonstrate your successes the right way and get that interview, right? So I would say look at some of those opportunities that get you in front of the companies that you want to like explore. Because really, once you're on the outside, you can take a job, and then if it sucks, a year later you could say that was a good experience, but not what I'm looking to do long term. 2 weeks later, you're doing something else. That's what's different about, and you can't do that a lot, but you have that opportunity now. So it's not a forever choice. Go find something that you think is interesting for now until the environment gets a little better, and then start thinking about consulting again, would be my advice.
I would agree, and it makes me sad to say that, because, you know, a year ago my advice would have been exactly the opposite. Like, that's what you want, go for it. But the reality is that all the firms are trying to figure out what the future will hold, and one of the things they've all pushed pause on is sort of the non-traditional hiring, especially the sort of short lead time non-traditional hiring. Like, one of the other things about the hiring cycle being based on the academic year is when you hire people, they don't start for 15 months, right? You hire people sort of the summer before their final year of school, then they take that summer off after school, and then they start the next fall. And so,
do you think a better way to do it is if you're in the, call it 10 years experience, let's say you're 30, 28 to 32, if they were to do a non-traditional route, no MBA, maybe a different strategy is to get super, super narrow and something that's directly using your experience in your service. And then you're going to like an industry group within the consulting firm, and you're only speaking with partners who are part of this super unique niche, and you know exactly what you're going after.
So yes, but the issue is consulting firms don't really do that kind of work typically, especially the big ones, right? If I really need to know a lot about whatever, so we had at least a couple of submariners, right? If I really need to know a lot about the way that, you know, Westinghouse steam turbines connected to nuclear reactors work, and I'm going to do consulting around that, I'm in the Navy, right? Or I'm a civilian contractor who works for the Department of the Navy. I'm not BCG. I'm not PwC. That's not the kind of work that they do. Or maybe I work for Westinghouse, right? But consulting sort of by definition tends to be a little bit more of a generalist skill set. And there are places where you will have some experts, right? I heard there was an aviator. My last project at BCG was about a year working for the Air Boss, Vice Admiral Miller, and Admiral Peters, the NAVAIR 00, to try and improve the mission capable rate for the Super Hornet fleet. And even there, right, like, I wouldn't necessarily want to hire a bunch of former pilots. The value add that we bring to the Navy is not, hey, I know about F-18s. Like, the reality is I'll never know as much about F-18s as somebody who flew an F-18 or an F-18 maintainer or an engineer who worked on the F-18 program at Boeing. The value add is I know a lot about the way that the best companies in the world that maintain industrial equipment do that maintenance. So I can show up to a Navy squadron, I can look around and say, the way that you do your scheduling for work is pretty different from the way that, you know, airlines do it. It's pretty different from the way that FedEx does it. And their planes, you know, 99.7% of them start every morning. And so maybe we can bring some of those best practices into this organization. So I'm not going to say that that there's no sort of possibility to get into consulting sort of in the nearish term, but I would say if you're asking on a sort of 3 to 6 month time horizon, it's a pretty tough sell. And it's just because, like, administratively, everyone's pushed pause on hiring for sort of non-traditional paths. And honestly, like, the answer to that could change in a month, right? If it starts to look like the economy is going to come back, if it starts to look like there's some sort of, you know, post-COVID resurgence and a vaccine comes out or whatever, like, I could see that answer very well changing. But I'll be frank, if I were one of you guys, I don't know that I would bet on it.
What do you think about for like Brody and others who have more experience, how should they think about navigating the consulting environment and getting more targeted, or should they look completely outside of it? And for example, maybe Brody goes to, VC firms that have $1 billion plus under management, and then they have things that are either directly or tangentially related to aerospace defense or his skill set in assessing new technologies. Like, how would you kind of first, what would be the questions that you would ask for someone who has more experience on approaching the consulting market?
Sure. So if I'm a more senior guy, right? If I'm retiring as a captain with 29 or 30 years of service, I'm in a very different place. Like, even if, and I looked at a couple of these guys. I remember I interviewed one guy who was an 05 coming out of the Marine Corps, and he was like, "Look, I want to apply as a consultant, like as a post MBA, the equivalent of a 28-year-old kid. Like, I want to start over and do something new, and I know that I don't know anything, and I'd be happy to start from the bottom." And I'm like, "Sir, I believe you. I believe you that you mean that when you say that, but like, I was in a battalion. You were a battalion commander. You owned 900 Marines. Like, it's a cultural shift to go from that to having a 25-year-old kid, edit your emails and tell you that you need to change your tone and deword. Not that it's impossible to do, but it takes a real commitment. I think if you're looking to leverage your experience and your skill set at that level, you have to be really clear about what that is and how it contributes, right? So if I'm a submariner, I know how to drive a submarine, obviously, and I know a bunch of technical stuff about the way that nuclear reactors and submarines work, but I also know about leading teams and driving operational excellence, right? And it's operational excellence really in a very specific way, right? Like a submarine 06 thinks about operations in a different way than naval aviation 06. And that sort of zero defects nuclear Navy mindset is pretty valuable in a certain set of industries, right? And so if you think about, where can I go to show up and say, hey, I know how to operationalize the shit out of a complex industrial process, right? You think about, like, I don't know, chemical refining, right? And you say, okay, I'm not a chemical engineer, but I know about complex industrial shit where everything has to work right. And I know about being the manager of that and managing a team that does that. You can imagine making that pitch maybe to a PE firm that needs an operations partner, right? I think you'd really have to do it at that level, because the bigger firms, or the sort of the more generalist firms, don't recruit talent at that level unless, as somebody said, you bring a book of business with you, right? Because if you think about it, like, they're not set up to take in people who do that typically. And so part of it is really being crisp about what your skill set is and being able to really clearly articulate why that makes sense. But another part of it is sort of recognizing, like, hey, I have a skill set that I've honed over years that is going to be more valuable to some people than other people, and let's figure out who the people that really value it are going to be.
Can we open up the floor and just kind of see what questions you all have?
Sure.
Maybe particularly to your situation. Yeah, feel free to fire away.
I have one question pertaining to the fact that, yes, non-standard is probably not a thing that's going to be happening for the foreseeable future. What sort of industries would pique the interest of someone at a consulting firm? Say, hey, I got out of the military, then I went in to do this type of work or this type of company. What would be putting you at the top of the list for when you start talking to a recruiter in a year from now or something like that?
So operational experience is always interesting, right? And if I think about sort of the traditional JO exits, there's places like, before it went nuts, General Electric had a very well regarded, like, junior officer rotational program where you'd get cycled through a bunch of different functions and you'd learn just a little bit about how industrial companies work. I know that there are other companies that do that. I think Siemens has a similar program. I think Honeywell has a similar program. So any kind of sort of hands-on operational experience where you're actually running as a manager stuff, you know, at the operational level, I think is going to be interesting. Anything that demonstrates your ability to sort of learn and pick things up quickly is going to be interesting. But I'd actually turn that around and ask you the question back. Why are you interested in consulting? Because some people view consulting as an opportunity to just try a bunch of different stuff, which is totally fine, right? Like that's part of our model is not everyone stays, and some people stay until they find a thing they love to do or they're interested in, and then they go leave and do that. And that's like totally okay. Other people do it because they really enjoy it, and it's the thing they want to do. I mean, I'm a partner now. I've got 10 years, and I'll probably stay another 20. And so some of us, you know, stay. But if you are looking at doing consulting as a stepping stone, in this environment, I think what I would ask is, can I skip that step? Whereas if you really want to do this job for the sake of doing this job, the question you ask is like, how can I make myself a more attractive candidate for 6 months or a year from now? Those are kind of two different questions. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
I can add just 2 pieces of flavor to that. If it is your intention to rotate into consulting, and this is more of like that tactical positioning that business school teaches you a little bit, and you see other people's resumes and you figure out, you kind of like sniff each other out and figure out like what the consulting firms latch onto. There's some great programs. I don't know if finance is in your particular wheelhouse, right? In terms of what you're looking to do and the skills you're looking to pick up on, but it's certainly something that veterans in general lack, right? Exposure to traditional accounting methods, managerial accounting, and the way in which you have to think about certain things from a corporate finance lens. If you can find a way to get into some of these programs that Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Goldman runs, these veterans integration programs, it does 2 things, right? It's fantastic training, and everybody knows it. So you're coming out the back end, a much more polished product. It gives you a new network, which I can't stress enough is like, that's all there is in life is your network, at least in the professional sphere. And lastly, it does matter that somebody like a JP Morgan decided to hire you, right? That's a marker. Just like on your fit reps, you've got markers, right? Everybody got JPME, everybody got, this or that job on your 3rd tour, and that tells the board something. Getting a marker like that on your resume would look pretty good if you're trying to pivot into consulting. Or something similar, because it really is about a portfolio of work, right? What you're doing. Like I see Jordan's shirt, right? Like there are great opportunities to get involved outside of just what your job is, right? Bunker Labs, 1871 here in Chicago, entrepreneurial efforts out there that are just a community that build your network and demonstrate that you have a passion about something and you're building up skills.
I have a couple of ideas here. One is to also think about the boutique consulting firms that might be like a 5-person shop, and you hit them up on LinkedIn and you say, hey, I got 3 months where I can work for free for you, paid for by tax dollars. Can you staff me on a project? Here are 3 ideas that I think I could help out with. That's a great way to kind of get in the door. Another thing, and I think it's interesting to kind of talk about some things that Kim and I have been doing together over the past couple of months. Kim is now working through 51 Labs and through another one she's now connected to the largest organization of senior women in private equity, 700 women. And she's directly speaking with a woman who managed $30 billion. She's also talking with the former head of the National Venture Capital Association through a project, just because a small company, me, needed some help. And because of that, she's directly connected to all of my connections. On another thing, we connected to her, a woman named Jessica Peltz, who is starting a VC fund. And she also has a thing called Global Women in VC Directory. Is that the name?
Yeah, Women in VC.
So she is doing a data project, but guess what? She's looking at every single person in that directee, title, company, where they're at. And if she wants to say, hey, Jessica, can you connect me with Steve Wan in San Francisco at XYZ Ventures? Probably going to happen. And yeah, you know what? Kim's been doing an amazing job for the past 3 months. So maybe there's not a direct route, I think is my point. And then using this time, maybe if you're on terminal, or if you have, just some time in general, or if you don't, and you just want to find some way, like there's an indirect path to get there as well.
So I want to say, like, when I think about the folks we placed into BCG from Elite Meet, a couple of them took a year, and a couple of them took a couple of tries, and like, that's okay. And the things that sort of differentiated those folks, and I think about guys like Randy Moon, they were just willing to take, he sort of took ownership of it. He was like, hey, I think about that first interview, I had some stuff going on. It didn't go great. I understand that, I can't try again immediately. Like, what will it take? How will I have to show that I'm different? How will I have to show that something's changed so that BCG is willing to take another look? And then he went and did those things, And so the more that you're able to spend that time doing something interesting, and Jordan actually makes a great point around one of the places where I think most military officer skill sets could be quite useful is in PE operating companies. I think there's a lot of folks out there who have little companies, right? Like, so a lot of PE firms will own relatively small, few $100 million kind of top line companies. And those are the kinds of companies where it's kind of hard to get talent, not because there's anything wrong with them, just because they're kind of obscure. Like they're not, they're not huge. And so that would be a good place to spend a year, to make connections through this network. If you were able to find a position somewhere like that, that would be a very interesting story to be able to tell if you wanted to try and do consulting on the other side.
And a good way to kind of get your foot in the door there is to leverage your military experience and say, with Brody, I've commanded 3 submarines. Can I just do a free lunch and learn, a fireside chat, next Friday with 25 of your people from your team? Just kind of share 3 lessons from 3 submarines. And that gets your foot in the door, and maybe it works there, or you can just keep on repeating that and go into all these other firms. And eventually somebody bites and say, hey, you know what? We have this manufacturing facility in Wisconsin, and I just really like that point you made a couple weeks ago during our lunch and learn. Would you mind just kind of talking with our COO over that facility? And you get your foot in the door, and that leads to another one. Let's keep on going. Matt, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to throw back to Stephen's comment and reply relative to dealing with the current pause that a lot of companies are going through and examining Marine folks on. One of the interesting kabuki dances I feel like I do in having really, really good conversations, but you want to build a relationship, you want to build understanding, yet that person and they're providing great transparency in terms of, no, yeah, we're not doing external hires right now. We're not doing non-traditional hires right now. From Stephen's viewpoint, what are constructive ways to keep a conversation going without seeming like you're the poodle at the door? Because no one's looking to waste anybody's time, but we know this is a waiting game, and for folks where you think there's a synergy and you think there's a fit, and you're hoping that when the taps start to come back open, you're one of the first drops of water that hits into the sink.
Sure. No, that's a great question. I think the first thing to recognize is that everyone understands, right? Like, we've all been in this position. For some of us, the luck or the timing has gone differently, but we've all been the person with the ask. And so it's okay to have an ask. And it's okay to like, I understand that part of the reason you're reaching out to me once a quarter is because, like, you want to be top of mind when we start hiring again. And that's totally fine. You shouldn't, like, don't feel at all like that's something you have to hide or that you have to be coy about. Like, everyone gets it. So that's the first thing I would say is just, like, it's okay. The other thing I would say is one way to really try and feel less like you're just sort of nipping at somebody's heels is to bring something. Like, so, if it's once every 3 months, it's not, it doesn't have to be huge, and it doesn't, you may not necessarily know what has value for somebody else, but try and bring something. Hey, I heard about this, or I'd like to tell you about this experience that I had that's interesting. I think it might have value to you, or I learned something I'd like to share with you, whatever it is, right? Just have something to say other than, hey, I'm still alive and I still need a job. And that's really all it comes down to. And I think beyond that, especially in this network with other veterans, veterans are always willing to make time for each other. That's really been the lesson of my professional career is literally every time I've emailed somebody, been like, hey, I used to be a Marine. Like, this is what's been on my mind. Can we chat? Like, they make time. They may not make time twice, right? And they may not do the thing I'm asking them to do, but vets are always willing to help each other out.
Thanks. Yeah, and one thing that I would add to that, Steve, is that what goes a long way is showing that you've done your homework. Like, just showing up and saying you want to chat and getting on the phone for 15 minutes, and it's clear that you don't know much about my industry or my role within the industry, or, it shows that you're it doesn't show that you don't care. It shows that you're at an initial phase of your search. And so we may not be ready to have the conversation about how do you get this job that you're seeking, right? We have to take a couple intermediate steps before you get to that point. So doing your homework really helps, and it makes it very easy to figure out quickly how I can help you.
Stephen, I think an interesting thing that you said earlier kind of makes me think of is with Randy's story, like, he spent 3 to 6 months back overseas when he did investment banking, had an MBA, came out of banking, struggled to find a job, had to go overseas, but then was really committed to that path of consulting. And that really also reminds me of Lou Emery, who just got a job at McKinsey. He did 170 informational interviews. He did 35 practice cases every single morning, 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. And he was doing info interviews. And the turning point for him was when he made a decision to focus on consulting, and just not really knowing with a lot of data to say this is why he wanted to do it, but he had enough data to say this is a generally good direction, and he was just going to focus in on it. So I think the interesting part of that is, after one info interview, you don't really know anything. After 10, you know a little bit. After 170, you know a shit ton. And then you also know the MDs and partners at different firms, and you can reference it. You have more of that cultural knowledge and the vocabulary. Mm-hmm. So if you have 3 to 6 months, or 9 or 12, then dive deep.
I mean, one of the things I'm more than happy to do is introduce you to folks, right? I know 170 veterans at BCG. I wouldn't make introductions necessarily to all of them, because it's probably a pretty wide net to cast, but I'm happy to connect you with 5 people that I think, you could have good conversations with. And if each of them does that, that's 50 conversations right there. Right. And I think it's worth thinking about what is the value of that, even if it's not like a direct connection to get, a referral or a recommendation. I wrote Lou a recommendation at BCG, in fact, although I guess he ended up at McKinsey. Good for him. I should shoot him a note. But also just the learning itself is valuable, right?
So let's do some more questions. We got about 10 more minutes.
I have a question about, I think Brody mentioned this, that he's looking at starting his own firm at this point.
Sure.
If someone decided that maybe the big firms are not the way to go for a number of reasons, and is there a freelance version of consulting that you can do? What is the market for that? And what would be, I guess, some advice on how to get that started? And also, I guess, conversely, some obstacles on how that could go bad.
Sure. So absolutely, there's a freelance market, and folks leave every year and hang out their own shingles and start their own firms. I think it's tougher to do if you've never done consulting, just because it's you have to have a pitch, and part of your pitch has to be like, I know a thing. I know how to consult about a thing. And if you don't have any experience, it can be tough, I think, to develop that pitch. Again, I don't think it's impossible. the challenge is, the challenge is very similar to the challenge of any other business. It's you're living on your savings. You're funding your own sort of business development. And honestly, the person to ask about that is our friend who's done a bunch of startups now is Jordan, right? So it's really sort of the same process as doing the startup thing, with the additional challenge of like, the better connected you are, the more you have a sort of sense for exactly what it is you'll consult on. Like typically the better, the more success you'll have early. I'll be candid, almost everyone I've seen who's sort of done their own consulting thing has done it as, put it this way, when I was at NavAir a year and a half ago, a buddy of mine, he turned to me, he said, like, look, NavAir is paying $60 million to have somebody perform this function. Why don't you and me just quit and do it for half of what BCG is charging and pocket it all? We'll make, 10 times as much money. I feel like that's a really common route to stand up your own firm, is really sort of take a thing you're doing already and run with it. So, if starting your own firm is something you're interested in, I wish you absolutely the best of luck. And I know that there's things that you can bring value. The question is just, how are you going to clearly sort of articulate that value proposition? I think that's the first question you have to answer. I saw something in text about, I'm realizing people are typing. There we go. There's a chat.
Yes, Rob asked, so do your homework is a common phrase. What kind of pre-conversation research should you be doing if you have like an hour?
Sure. So, and this is the same as, if some sort of, college student were to call you as a Navy officer and ask about your career field, because they wanted to sort of get a sense for whether they wanted to be a SWO or a submariner or an aviator or whatever else. I need, like, if I get the sense that you haven't even Googled my firm, it's not about like I'm offended or anything. It's like, I'm giving you time. And the best way for you to make use of that time is to ask me things that you couldn't get another way. And so if I'm going to fulfill the same function that Google is going to fulfill, like, okay, now we wasted half of our time, me just sort of telling you like what PwC is, right? And so I think that's sort of the main one. And then I think the other one is not having a sense for what you want to get out of the conversation, right? You need to have an objective for yourself. Am I trying to learn? Am I trying to get a recommendation? Am I trying to figure out, how I can get in the recruiting pipeline? You may not achieve it, and that's okay. But like, I want to have the sense that you're trying to get somewhere in the conversation. Otherwise, we just kind of meander, and that's not necessarily bad. I'm not saying that the conversation can't go well if you do it that way, but it doesn't feel. I want it to feel like a good use of my time. And if I can't give you what you are trying to get because you don't know what it is, it's hard to have that feeling. Alex, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on top of that.
That's 101, right? That's like, you don't start from zero in the conversation, right? You just have to say a couple things up front to establish that you have already, those things, right? Hey, I saw this on the website, and I also saw recently that this trend is happening in industry. How did you guys think about that? And how does PwC go about solving those problems? What are some of the players at the table, if you will? Like, how do you sell that piece of work? That would be an example of how you would take something from a website and information that it tells me you understand some of the teams within PwC, you just may not know how they work together and how PwC tries to solve the problem. Because then I'm trying to give you information that says, do you find this stuff interesting, right? And then we can start driving, like Steve said, towards that goal of, are you just trying to figure out if this suits you? Do you need a recommendation? Do you need some coaching? What have you? The other piece in terms of like what you can do pre-conversation, if you will, is like the whole point of a website for a consulting firm is marketing material for recruiting, right? Like it's recruiting clients and it's recruiting people to want to be at the firm. So talk about something that you have read that you found interesting on the website, as trite as that may sound, because it's the whole point of what's on the website, right? Is to attract eyeballs. It's not for ourselves to tell ourselves how great we are and how smart we think we all are. It's for you, basically. So you can pull that into the conversation and have a more meaningful conversation about subject matter instead of just the industry itself.
Another maybe another way to kind of tackle that kind of conversation in terms of pre-conversation research is pre-conversation research about you. Like, what problems are you facing? Have you done 20 interviews and you've just bombed every single one and you're not getting any feedback? Like, these guys like Steven and Alex have probably interviewed a ton of people. So coming to them and saying like, hey, can you just be honest with me? Like, what am I getting wrong in this? Am I looking at the wrong industry? Am I looking at the wrong company? Am I looking at the wrong function within this company or industry? Can you just give me some no BS feedback? You know, partner who has 10 years of experience, because that gets me emotionally involved in you. And you get like really tactical feedback. And I'm also a lot more likely to refer you to somebody else who might be a better fit.
Thanks, guys. That tracks a lot. I think part of that is also what Jordan said is if the first thing you do is ask people for help, I think they're usually going to lean in a lot more too.
What are some more questions? Let's do another 5 minutes.
I got a quick question here. And I guess it's more of trying to understand consulting industry or consulting companies' lines of effort and what happens when they run into gaps that maybe if you have your own consulting company or if you're looking for a, you know, to use your skill set that help that company out, but they just don't know they need help yet. And what I'll use here as an example is, you know, back in the Deepwater Horizon accident, a number of companies, not just British Petroleum, but I think it was Chevron, said, hey, we need to go look out and figure out, you know, how'd that happen and what vulnerabilities do we have in our system that could cause the same type of mistake. And they didn't really have anybody on their company that could go answer that question. So they said, well, who are the best people to talk to? We were thinking of talking to NASA, and a bunch of people came, no, you don't want to talk. You want to talk to those submarine guys. Those guys, you know, they understand deep water. They understand quality control. They understand what happens when you have a whole bunch of switch theory and root cause analysis. And those are the guys you wanted to talk to. And then the companies realized that they didn't, whatever their consulting companies didn't have that skill set. And they went out to the submarine force, and I was tasked as one of the people, hey, go brief Chevron on how we make sure that our submarines come back every time we send them out to sea. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you know, okay, I'm doing that for free, but there's probably a submarine guy out there that wants to get in consulting that probably should be either hired by the company in a subcontract, or maybe that's a line of effort, quality control, root cause analysis, switch theory, whatever you want to call it, that the consulting company, you know, doesn't have. So I guess my question is how can you leverage that, or at least allow a consulting company to understand that they've got some gaps that you can fill, maybe at a subcontracting level, or, hey, this is a line of business where you need to go develop it because there's potential there. I guess that's my question.
So there actually are consulting firms that do that. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Exponent. It used to be called Failure Analysis. There are firms that specialize in that kind of work. And I'm realizing I hadn't made the connection until you said it, but I actually have some folks in my network that work there. So I should probably make the connection and see if those are folks that would be interested in sort of more senior officers with some of that technical background stuff. But so the short answer is yes. Like I'm 100% sure there are places out there that see that talent and see the value of it. I'll be frank, that's not what I've ever done in any of the firms that I've worked at. Like we work on business problem stuff much more than sort of the operational stuff. I'm sure Exponent's not the only one out there, but that's a great thought, right? And that's exactly what I meant when I said if you think about what is your unique skill set, like define that first, and then think about where could that have value, right? Because the reality is, if you're a senior guy, like you're not going to, unless you want to go get an MBA at 55, and start at the same place as the 28-year-olds, like that's just not the path you're going to follow. So you really need to crisply articulate, what is the skill set that I bring that's unique and differentiated? How can I leverage my experience?
Cool. Steve, Alex, do you have time for one more question?
Yes, I can stay for one more. No problem.
Anybody? Bueller? All right. Hearing none, we shall move on. This is really good. And I think, I think one of my key takeaways from this is less about like a specific path into consulting and more about how to think about consulting broadly and not and also just how to think about transition a little more broadly. And I think the value of doing a lot of research and asking thoughtful questions, and that people are willing to help out if you just kind of reach out. I think that's it. Guys, appreciate your time with this.
Of course, happy to help. You guys all have my email now. Feel free to reach out.
All right. Talk to you later.
Likewise. Great questions, guys. Good luck.
Thanks for setting up, Jordan.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.